This is the M2 MacBook Air, and it's one of the most misunderstood Macs out there, in my opinion. There's a lot of negative sentiment floating out there about this machine, and while the M2 Air does have its quirks, I'm here to tell you that most of that negativity couldn't be further from the truth. So with that said, let's get into it. Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. I bought the M2 MacBook Air at launch, and it's been my daily driver up until very recently for doing everything from light productivity and design work to really resource-heavy stuff like video editing, coding, and 3D modeling. After 10 months or so of using this pretty much every day, I can confidently say that this laptop is capable of so much more than you might think. People seem to be fairly polarized on this machine and either love it or hate it, and I think that stems from a few different things. One is going to be the more superficial stuff like design and wear, basically anything that's more visual, and two is on the performance end of things, so let's kick things off with the visual aspect first. The model that I have here is Starlight in color. I've mentioned this before, but other than me just having other Starlight products like the iPad and just generally liking lighter color products, there's a few advantages you get by having a lighter model like this. Starlight doesn't show any fingerprints really at all, and anywhere around the ports where the color can wear off on the aluminum from repeated contact is just a lot less visible, so I think having a lighter color just reduces a perceived wear from a visual perspective. Some people say that they've seen a lot of wear on the Midnight models around the ports and below the keyboard if they're wearing a watch and the strap is hitting on there, but that really seems to be dependent on the person using the machine. I also know folks who have the Midnight version and it's still in great condition, so take that for what it's worth. If you are on the go a lot with this and you put it in situations where it can be prone to contact, that's something that you may want to consider. But outside of that, coming back to the on-the-go aspect of this is where this machine kills it, in my opinion. This is by far the lightest, slimmest MacBook available, and it's perfect for traveling or carting around with you, even if that's casually around the house. I've taken this with me on a few trips, and I much prefer hauling the M2 Air around with me versus the Pro models that are a little more bulky and heavy. There's one visual element that pertains to the actual display between the Pro and the Air that I think is quite misunderstood, but before we touch on that, I want to take a minute to talk about the sponsor of this video, CASETiFY. CASETiFY is known for their custom phone cases, but they do offer a wide range of products for different Apple devices, including MacBooks and iPads that can help with some of the things that I just mentioned. CASETiFY provides 360 all-around protection both on the device itself and the screen, which is beneficial to the overall health of your devices. I've got their Impact MacBook case and MacBook screen protector, along with the Ultra Impact Folio iPad case and iPad screen protector. It only takes a few seconds to pop either the iPad or the MacBook into each case, provided you have everything lined up and everything is nice and snug once they're in place. Both cases have these EcoShock corners. On the MacBook, they're on the bracket lining, providing superior impact protection. And similarly on the iPad case, they cover the inside edges and side corners and are great for drop cushioning. The MacBook screen protector is magnetic and it just clips into place, so super easy to apply and remove. It filters out blue light to help with eye strain and safeguards your privacy, which is super helpful, especially in public places. The iPad case has an adjustable horizontal stand for viewing at different angles, and the iPad screen protector is made out of durable tempered glass, and that prevents against scratches and cracking, and still maintains the iPad's sleek and slim design. I have the clear MacBook case and this geometric pattern on the iPad case, but you can choose from a ton of different prints or collections to customize these to help represent the unique you. These are great quality. I like the look of both of them, and if you're someone who is looking for a case or protection for any of your Apple products, you can check out CASETiFY.com/Kyle Erickson today and get 15% off of your purchase. Alright, so back to the display. I say this is pretty misunderstood because of one specific spec on the M2 Air display versus the Pro. There seems to be a general idea floating out there that the Pro screen is way brighter than the Air, and I don't find that to be particularly true. The Pro can get to 1000 nits sustained brightness and 1600 peak, but if you look at the fine print, that's in HDR content only. For SDR content, which is what we're looking at the majority of the time, that number is 500 nits, matching the Air. Sure, the Pro does have a ProMotion 120Hz panel, and it's smoother for scrolling and motion at times. The blacks are a bit deeper for sure, but the Air display is no slouch. It's got fantastic color accuracy, outstanding contrast for an IPS panel, And it's great for anything like photo or video editing where you are counting on color reproduction, which I think is something that you expect with any Apple device these days. I've never really had any issues doing those tasks like photo and video editing, or really anything for that matter, and this is another area where I see the base M2 Air and the version that I have is almost two different models. You'll see a lot of complaints about this machine that seem to suggest that the M2 Air is severely restrictive, and in most of those cases, it's when somebody picks up the base model with 8 gigs of RAM and a 256 gig SSD and tries to do all this crazy stuff on it. These crazy benchmarks and tests are only applicable to a very small portion of the population. Most folks out there are just looking for a new Mac and are just answering emails, opening spreadsheets, video calls, just your average everyday office tasks and media consumption. That's who that base model is for. For people who need more, that just isn't gonna cut it a lot of the time. I've gone through tests on the channel here where Photoshop can take up like 7 gigs of RAM editing raw photos. Video editing can eat that up quickly too, as can a bunch of different power-hungry apps. The version that I have, I bought knowing that I was gonna do all of those things, and in those instances, you're gonna want at least 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs or more of storage usually. Mine does have 16 and 512, and I also bumped up the M2 chip from an 8-core GPU to 10. So this machine that I have here, I would say only loosely resembles the base model, and I think that's an important distinction to make. In real world performance, when you're not looking at specs or benchmarks, for most things, it's really hard to notice any difference between the M2 Air that I have here and my M2 Pro Mac Mini with a 1TB SSD and 32 gigs of RAM, even for tasks like video editing and programming. I've done my fair share of coding on this machine, mostly for front-end stuff, either building JavaScript apps, native mobile apps, and cross-platform React Native apps. And most of the time, everything is buttery smooth with super fast compile times. Keep in mind that these apps are a lot of personal projects or for smaller startups and things like that, where there's not huge processes or a ton of external libraries or requirements, but regardless, it's still very impressive. On the more creative end of things, I've edited about 30 of these videos on the M2 Air without any issues at all. That would include the actual editing in Final Cut Pro and a lot of photo editing in Lightroom and Affinity Photo for thumbnails and Instagram posts. Sure, if you get crazy with your timeline and add a bunch of motion graphics, the Air will start to slow down on you, but honestly, 95% of the time, it's just as good as the M2 Pro chip for most things. I know the Air doesn't have any fans and it will warm up a bit, but I never found it to throttle too much or even get particularly hot outside of doing 3D work. 3D modeling and very GPU intensive stuff is one area where it can tend to struggle a bit, but I'd say that's where you start to get into pretty specific use cases. And even if it does slow down doing those types of things, it's still usable. For myself, I don't have any concerns with the longevity of the machine because of heat. The only thing that I'll say with those tasks is it does really love to suck back the battery life when it's going all out and it does start throttling. Most of the time with any low to mid draw tasks like productivity, basic software development, design work, that kind of thing, you get a full day of battery on this, no problem. Even editing videos with a regular timeline with some B-roll laid over it here and there, you don't generally have to worry about things too much, but when you see that CPU load climb over 70 to 80% and it stays over that mark for an extended period of time, you can see that battery life get eaten up in only a few hours. Again, if you're doing that kind of thing, I would say it's something where you're probably going to have access to power and be using this with an external monitor because both video editing and 3D work aren't really ideal on a laptop screen. I will say these latest machines hold their long-term battery capacity way better than those old Intel machines ever did. I remember always being paranoid about leaving my MacBook plugged in at my desk too long because it would kill the battery. It seemed like every year you'd be swapping it out or paying for battery service if you just left it plugged in all the time. With the M2 Air, I'm still at 100% capacity, coming up on a year, and I don't really notice any difference in my overall battery life from when I first got this, so a huge win there as well. It's been super helpful that Apple added the MagSafe port back on the M2 as well. Not that I really care how it charges, but more because it frees up an extra port. It used to be that I absolutely needed a USB hub with the M1 Airs in previous models because I'd use one USB-C port for power and the other for an external monitor, and I used to hate that when I was programming and I needed to plug my phone into a machine to test apps and all my ports ports were used up. I know it's still not great with only 2 ports there, but it is a lot more functional. When it comes to wireless connectivity, you've got Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.0, which has worked well enough in most instances. I'd say that now that I have a Wi-Fi 6E system and I see some pretty big speed gains on the new Wi-Fi 6E capable Pro machines, I sort of wish that this had it too, but that's really nitpicking, and to notice those changes, you're likely going to need at least a gigabit internet connection. I haven't had any weird drops or issues with my AirPods, keyboards, mice, anything at all. That's all been rock solid, and honestly, this machine has been an absolute beast for me. I still use this a ton, even with owning the new M2 Pro machines. It's super portable, the screen is great, keyboard is great, and I love that it's dead silent. If I would have got the base model, maybe I would have been one of those folks with more of a negative outlook on this laptop, but that is not the case, and I think for me, this is definitely my personal favorite out of any of the Mac machines that I've used over the last year. There's a lot of rumors swirling about the next iteration of the Air coming with an M3 chip and an OLED screen, but for me, I generally don't like to read too much into that stuff because a lot of the time it's just plain wrong and you never really know what's coming or when it's coming. You can find some pretty screaming deals on the M2 MacBook Air these days, both in retail stores and if you head over to the Apple refurb site, you can grab them at a discount there most of the time as well, and those are as good as new. So definitely a lot of value there if you are someone who is looking for one of these. I know everyone's experience will be different on this machine, so please, if you own an M2 Air or really any of the M series machines, I'd love for you to leave a comment and let me know how your experience has been with it, or maybe if you're considering picking one of these up and why. I know personally, I find this to be the perfect combo of performance and portability. The quality's outstanding and I've had zero issues with it so far. We'll see what the next iteration of the Air brings, but for now, this is still my favorite all-around Mac. That's it for me. Thank you to everyone today for tuning in. If you enjoyed this long-term review, feel free to hit that thumbs up button. If you want to see more tech-related content, or if you want to become friends and listen to Endless Love in the Dark, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next upload.